And today we start the journey of David in the second book of Samuel. In the first book of Samuel, we learned about this battle between David and Saul. And we saw how it represents the battle between Yeshua and Satan. And we also saw how it represents the battle of you and me, the beloved, the people that has turned to God, that is going through the wilderness journey because of persecution by this, the prince of this dark kingdom in the world. And now finally Saul is dead. And it might be that all of David's troubles are over. But as we will find in the second book of Samuel, Satan and the whole Antichrist movement has a way to rear up many heads. That's why it's also interesting in the book of Revelation that the dragon has many heads. Because if one head is cut off, Saul died. The Antichrist is still going to rear his ugly head. And this time in the second book of Samuel, we will see this struggle between David and his own son. Here where Lucifer is represented by Absalom, where Lucifer in the first book of Samuel was represented by Saul. And it's amazing, the more you think you overcome all the enemies without and the enemy within, the more the enemy just rears up another head, this time even closer to you. So close, this time, to David, that when Absalom finally died, David said he wished it was him that died. And again, we are reminded how all the angels in heaven were once the sons of God. And how the brother, like Yeshua said, my own brother will turn against me. How even his own brother, his own son, Judas, one of his disciples, turned against him, representing how Satan himself once was close to both Yahuwah and to Yeshua in heaven, and how he turned against them. And we see this beautifully illustrated in the life of David. So today we start with the second book of Samuel, chapter 1. David hears of Saul's death. So in the last session we learned that Saul eventually died and his bones was buried between a tree in Yabesh, which means dry. It came to pass after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had about 2 days in Ziklag. So it's interesting that he stayed for 2 days in Ziklag. And we remember what happened in Ziklag. David came back. Remember, he was supposed to fight with the king of the Philistines, Achish. So Achish said, because the other kings of the Philistines didn't want to trust David, so David was sent home and he didn't go into the battle, which was a good thing. He felt offended. We learned about that. But it was a good thing because during this very same battle, the Philistines killed Jonathan and Saul. And what would David have done? How difficult would it have been for him if he was inside the battle on the side of the Philistines and he saw how David, how his own brother, a friend that's closer than his brother, Jonathan, is being killed. So it's better that he was sent home. It worked out because as he was sent home and he came to Ziklag, remember, the Amalekites, while the Philistines was busy attacking Israel, the Amalekites came like the hyenas they are, and they attacked the women and the children in the city of Ziklag. And we had that whole beautiful story how David and his men, the 400, went to save the women and the children, and they recovered everything and they brought them back home. So at this stage, David was still in Ziklag. He was still the 2 days that he spent there. It's reminding me of the Bible telling us how Yeshua spent exactly 2 days with the Samaritans in their city, not in Jerusalem. And then on the third day, everything always works around these 3 days. For 2 days he was in the grave, and a day in the Bible prophetically is 1,000 years. So for both the two, he was 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. Sorry, on the third day he rose after 2 days, and he was 2 days with the Samaritans, and David was 2 days in Ziklag with his bride, with his wife and his children that he went to rescue, but Ziklag was burnt down to the ground. And if we think about that prophetically, for 2,000 years, Yeshua is hidden like the 2 days that Yeshua was with the Samaritans, who was hidden to the Jews. He spent 2 days with the Gentiles, 2,000 years. We have learned about Jesus Christ in the Gentile nations, and the Jews wants nothing to do with Jesus. But now, after the 2,000 years is almost over, we are realizing that it is Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah, and how the real Yeshua brings the Samaritans back into covenant with the Jews, with the older brother Judah, because the Samaritans represents the northern 10 tribes, and how David also in the city that's burned down spent 2 days before they actually going to come and make David king above all the other kings, and above there's no sons left for Saul to be made king anyway. And everybody knew that Samuel has anointed David to become king. But it took 2 days in a burned down city for 2,000 years in the ashes of Yahuwah's kingdom on this earth that Satan so deceitfully thought he destroyed, but he was hiding it with all his deception and his false doctrines. And now, finally, after 2,000 years, the son of David can be crowned king. So it came to pass on the 3rd day that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent, and earth upon his head. And so it was, when he came to David, that he fell to the earth, and he did obeisance. And David said unto him, From where have you come? And he said, Out of the camp of Israel I have escaped. And David said unto him, How did it go? I pray you, tell me. And he answered, All the people have fled from the battle, and many of the people have been killed and are dead. And also Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. And David said unto the young man that told him these things, How do you know that Saul and Jonathan his son is dead? And the young man told him, As I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa, remember that's where the battle turned bad for Israel. Behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, the chariots and the horsemen followed hard after him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called unto me. And I answered, and I said, Here I am. And he said, Who are you? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. So interesting that even in the nation of Israel, there was other nations that joined Israel, and they also became basically part of Israel and became part of the soldier regime. And here, this specific Amalekite was in the camp together with the Israelites. And he said unto me again, Stand, I pray you, upon me, and kill me, for anguish has come upon me, because my life is yet whole in me. Even after falling on the spear, Saul was still alive. So he needed a little bit more help. I stood upon him, and I slew him, because I was sure that he could not live after that he had fallen on his own sword. And I took the crown that was upon his head, and the bracelet that was on his arm, and I've brought them unto you, my Lord. I find it interesting that the Amalekite calls David Lord. And David took hold of his clothes, and he rent them. And likewise all the men that were with David rent their clothes. So it was custom in the old days in Israel, when you heard very bad news, that you would tear your clothes. And that always reminds us of how the veil was torn from top to bottom, as if it was a man tearing his clothes from his neckline downwards. And they mourned. So I also find it interesting that the men that was with David rent their clothes and mourned for Saul because they hated him. Every time that David saved Saul's life, his men would say, Why do you do that? You've got this opportunity. God is giving you Saul so that you can kill him. So I'm just wondering if they're really mourning for him. But David did, because remember, he loved Saul. He did. And they mourned and wept and fasted until the evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of Yahuwah, and for the house of Israel, because they were fallen by the sword. So when I read this verse, then I say, maybe they were legitimately also mourning, because maybe they weren't really mourning for Saul as much as they did for his beautiful son Jonathan and for all of Israel. And David said unto the young man that told him, From where are you? And he answered, I am the son of a stranger, an Amalekite. And David said unto him, How have you not been afraid to stretch forth your hand to destroy Yahuwah's anointed one? So this Amalekite thought he was doing a great thing. He came to David to tell him, your enemy Saul is finally dead. Here's his crown. Here's his bracelet. And just for in case you want to maybe give me a reward, I'm the one who finally did kill Saul. Because Saul was already wounded so badly, he wouldn't have survived. But he was still alive. So if the Philistines found him, they would have definitely abused him. So I'm the one that finally gave the death blow to Saul. So maybe the Amalekite did think he was doing a great thing, but he didn't know David. And this does remind me now, because the Bible talks about the son of strangers so many times. You know about the verses that says when the son of a stranger turns to Yahuwah to keep his Sabbath days holy and to do what pleases Yahuwah, then that son of a stranger will become a pillar in the house of Yahuwah and will receive a name better than sons and daughters. And so all the wild branches that are the Gentile nations that turns back to Yahuwah are grafted back into the olive tree. So even this Amalekite, who is a son of a stranger, when the strangers, when the Gentiles, when the world who does not turn back to Yahuwah, when they think they can serve Yahuwah, like this Amalekite thought he can serve David, he called him Lord, they have a big problem. They have a huge amount of curse and penalty coming upon them. Because why? The strangers that think they can serve David and tell him about this news of Saul, thinking they're going to get a reward, ticket to heaven or something, is making a big mistake, because this Amalekite does not know David. If he knew David, if he knew what kind of man David was, he would have known that David loved Saul and Jonathan, and that David never wanted Saul to die in such a horrible way. David said from the beginning, God will judge for me. And if I did wrong to Saul, then God will judge me. But if Saul is doing wrong to me, then God will judge him. But let not my hand or the hand of any of my men stand upon Saul. So if this stranger knew David, he would never have come to tell him that Saul died by his own hand. And it's almost the same. I'm hearing a lesson in this for us. We as the Gentiles who realized we are the lost sheep of Israel and is turning back to the son of David, the shepherd king. We must not come like Paul says in Romans 11. The Gentiles mustn't come and be boastful that the natural branches, the Jews, has been broken off so that we, the Gentiles, can be grafted in. We mustn't be arrogant about this, because the same God who broke off the natural branches because of their disobedience and their unbelief can also break off the grafted back branches. But together with the natural branches, we form one olive tree, and we are supposed to be one kingdom under the hand of the Son of David. So if we know God really, if we know him from his word, from his actions, from what he said like David, what he did like David, and what he didn't do like David, we must also realize that we cannot stand before Yeshua or before Yahuwah in the name of Yeshua and be boastful that we are better. We have, as the strangers, we have done things that might not be pleasing him. Like we saw how many times David forgave Saul. And we learned from that how our journey in this world will also have to be characterized by not bringing judgment upon anybody else, especially the enemies of God or our own enemies. That has to be in the hand of God. And we must be careful, because this Amalekite didn't know David. And he saw David mourning and weeping and renting his clothes. But what he didn't expect was what happened next. David said, "Who do you think you are? Who are you to think you've got the right to kill the man that God anointed to become king?" And David called one of the young men and said, "Go near to him and fall upon him and smite him so that he dies." And David said unto the Amalekite, "Your blood is upon your head, for your mouth hath testified against thee to say, I have slain the Lord's anointed." So this man, one moment, he was maybe the center of attention. He thought he was going to get a reward. He thought he was bringing good news, and the next moment he was dead because he didn't know the kind of man David was. And therefore he assumed things. We are supposed, when we study the word like we're doing, to know God better and not to assume. The Bible says God has no pleasure in the demise or the destruction of the wicked. And yes, we as humans, like this Amalekite and probably a lot of other people in Israel, secretly, although it's sad, but secretly they are glad that Saul is finally dead and that all Saul's sons are dead. So David can finally become king. And we have to be honest with ourselves. Sometimes we also want the demise or the destruction of the really wicked men. If I do my research about the New World Order and I see who these people are that are running the world, and I see who they really are, and I look into into everything. Honestly, I just want them to be struck by the fire that proceeds from the mouth of God and be burned up to ashes. And it's almost like I want to say, finally, these bastards are dead. And surely their judgment comes. Like David said, Saul will be judged by God. It's not for me. So the same in my attitude. Maybe I should not be like the Amalekite, to be happy and, I'm almost thinking about the idea that when somebody is dead, the saying goes that people will dance upon his grave. We cannot stand and dance upon the graves of all the Luciferians that decided to worship the serpent and stand both legs against the kingdom of Yahuwah, because the final battle is between Yahuwah and Satan. And these puppets are just bringing in the beast system so that can happen. Because they're also humans. They somehow, if there was a chance, I don't know, after all the ceremonies and all the rituals they have gone through to get to the degrees that they are, if there's a potential for them to still be saved, I don't know. Must that stop me from praying for them? Must that stop me from hoping that God can change them? What it must do, it must stop me from being what is the right word? I'm struggling to tell you what I'm thinking and feeling so that it can apply to what this Amalekite was doing. I must stop bringing them to mind for destruction and then glee over that and then be happy one day that they are destroyed. Although I see in the Psalms of David so many times where David says, Father, why must the wicked prosper while your children are being persecuted? Will you bring the wicked to judgment and bring upon them the death they deserve so that your children can live in peace? So, yes, we have that on the one side, but our attitude towards that should not be that we find our hand, like the Amalekite's hand, in the demise of these people. Because final judgment, retribution, and revenge only belongs to Yahuwah. David lamented with his lamentation over Saul and Jonathan his son. Also, he bade them to teach the children of Judah the use of the bows. Behold, this is written in the book of Yashar. So the book of Yashar has been deleted and taken out of the Bible by the lovely Roman Catholic Church because of many reasons, of which one is it teaches us a lot of things that the Bible doesn't. The Bible teaches us enough to bring us to repentance and back to the covenant, but to really understand the prophecy and the history and why many things happened the way they did and how many things are going to happen in the end. It's a good thing to read the book of Yashar, and in that is also included the book of Jubilees, Maccabees, and Enoch. And here in the second book of Samuel, the book of Yashar is mentioned because everybody knows about the book of Yashar. And David taught all the children of Judah because at that moment he was from the house of Judah. And we see that for a couple of years, he reigned only over the house of Judah, the two southern tribes. So he taught them the use of the arrow and the bow and arrow. And the beauty of Israel is slain upon your places. How are the mighty fallen? So this is the lamentation that David brought over Saul, and I'm sure over Jonathan as well, to say that Saul, and remember in the first couple of sessions we did in the first book of Samuel, we called Saul a beautiful man, for he was. And here David calls him, the beauty of Israel is slain upon your high places, upon Gilboa. Remember where he fell. And he says, how the mighty have fallen. Because in the eyes of David, Saul was a mighty man. Tell it not to Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. So here David says, don't tell the whole world about Saul being slain. Because just like I saw in my mind's eye, people dancing on the grave of somebody that didn't like, here I'm thinking, Saul and David says, lest the uncircumcised heathen and the daughters of the uncircumcised Philistines rejoice and dance upon the grave of Saul and Jonathan. So don't tell it to the Gentiles, to the enemy. Yea, you mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be any rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For there the field of the mighty is vilely cast away. The shield of Saul, as though he had never been anointed with oil. It's so sad. He even says he's even kind of cursing Gilboa, where Saul and all the Israelite soldiers and Jonathan died, and said, may you never get rain or dew again, because it's upon you, you mountain of Gilboa, where the beauty, where the mighty has been slain down. The mighty one, even Saul's shield and all his armor and everything that was taken to Ashtaroth's temple, that has all been lost to this mighty, beautiful man. And he's the one that has been anointed with oil. He was supposed to glisten with oil and stand upon the mountain of Zion, not fall upon the mountain of Gilboa. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. Oh, it's so sad. No matter how bad Saul was, Jonathan still loved him. No matter how much Jonathan loved David, he was loyal to his father Saul. And they together, even in death, Jonathan was with Saul like he was in life. Father and son were together. So as they were lovely and pleasant in their lives, in their deaths even, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. We are reminded how strong Saul was when he was still a man of God, and how many of the enemies he destroyed when he became king in the beginning, remember? And we're reminded how amazing Jonathan was when he went up those sharp rocks and the hills and he slew the Philistines. We don't tell this to the enemy so that the daughters of the uncircumcised can rejoice. No. We tell it in verse 24 to the daughters of Israel to weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet, with other delights, who put an ornament of gold upon your apparel. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? O Jonathan, you were slain in your high places. I'm distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant has you been unto me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing even the love of women. So a lot of people say that David and Jonathan were homosexual. Oh, come on. The fact that he says your love to me was even more sweet than the love of a woman. Of course, if you don't know who this God or who this man is, you can make such stupid, idiotic assumptions. But I mean, for David, the companionship, the love and the covenant and the agreement and the loyalty between him and Jonathan was more than he had with any of his wives. He didn't have that with Michal. He didn't have that with Bathsheba. He didn't have that kind of companionship with any of his wives. And we know that David eventually had many wives, but he only had one real friend that was closer to him than a brother. And that was Jonathan. And that's why Jonathan's love to David meant more than even the love of women. And he ends chapter 1 to say, "How are the mighty fallen, and how have the weapons of war perished?" So this is on the third day after he spent 2 days in Ziklag. This all happened on the third day. And now we see in chapter 2 that we will do tomorrow that David is anointed king. Finally, after 2,000 years of the kingdom of God, the Jerusalem seeming to be burned down, the Jerusalem city of David, not the political state right now, but the real Jerusalem, the bride of God, the kingdom of David, the throne of the Son of David, seems to not exist. Seems to be only up there in heaven because Satan is ruling on this earth. And for 2 days, David was sitting in a burned down city. And after the third day, he was crowned as king. And we see this prophetically also in how this world will end when everything is burnt down. But David has rescued his bride. And Yeshua, everything is going to be burned down and totally destroyed, like the slogan on the dollar bill says, "Orb at chaos." Order, the new world order will rise out of chaos. They will bring this world into chaos, and then the beast will rule and reign. And when Yeshua does come back, the mighty warrior, he will bring everything to an end. And he, the one that has been hidden, the Bible says the Jews will look upon him as upon an only son, and they will mourn for him as of for an only son. They will recognize him. And their blindness will finally be over, and they will be reunited into one kingdom. I will bring back my children from the north and the east and the south and the west. And together with the house of Judah, come back to the mountain of David. And they will rejoice as one. And my king David will be king over them. There will be one flock with one king over them. So after the 2,000 years since the first coming and the second coming of Messiah, we will see how all these prophetic ancient history lessons come into fulfillment. And David finally, after 20 years of persecution, 20 also has the number 2 in it, will finally be anointed king over Israel.